Hey guys, welcome back to the MattyO channel. Today's going to be a little bit different than the usual videos that I put up. We're going to be doing a little story time video to explain where I've been and why I've been going MIA a lot this year. Basically, I almost died. That's the TLDR. Don't worry though, this time I think I'm finally starting to get better. Though I've thought that multiple times this year already and been wrong every time. So I just want to take a second before we get in to ask you guys to hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. As a small but growing channel, likes, comments, and subscriptions help the channel out tremendously. So go on down below the video, hit that red subscribe button, smash that like button, and send me a message down in the comments. Thank you so much. Let's get right into this story. So yeah, this year's been one of the most dangerous years of my life. I won't say it's the worst year of my life, but it's definitely the closest to dying that I've ever been. It starts last year, sometime in November. I'd felt just a small pain in my lower right side. At first, it was something that I was just not too worried about because it didn't feel that bad. It didn't hurt that badly. And otherwise, I was fine. I didn't have any other symptoms, just a small pain in my lower right side. You know, I thought it was just gonna go away after a few minutes. You know, maybe it was some gas or something. But no, it did not. As the day went on, I wasn't in that much pain, but I started to feel like a fever coming on. And that night, when I took my temperature, I noticed that I had a very low fever. You know, something like 99 degrees Fahrenheit. Something that, you see, you take note of, but you're not super concerned about. However, when I Googled my symptoms of, lower right pain and having a small fever, the first result that comes up is appendicitis. I did not realize at that moment exactly how many times I was gonna have to hear that word over the next couple months. It was kind of late at night, and I still wasn't in that much pain. I didn't have a high fever. So I decided that I'd call my doctor in the morning to see what to do. I kind of figured that would be perfectly okay, because everything I'd seen about appendicitis throughout my entire life has said that you'd be in intolerable amounts of pain. And really, I wasn't in that much pain at all. Didn't feel much worse than I had in the morning, and I wasn't super concerned. I probably should have been, but I wasn't that concerned at the time. So I went to bed. Then the next morning I wake up. The first thing I do is check my temperature. Yep, I've still got a fever. So I call my doctor and explain my symptoms. Well, they told me exactly what Google had told me the night before and said that I should go right on into the emergency room because I probably have appendicitis. Great. So, I gather up my stuff, my phone charger, some headphones, and I take that fun little ride into the emergency room, totally expecting them to just send me home with nothing wrong because, I wasn't in that much pain. I just kind of assumed that they were just gonna send me straight home. They did not. I guess you could tell that based on the title of this video. I was seen pretty quickly when I was in there. I guess waving the word appendicitis around really gets the attention of the doctors, and they gave me a CT scan. 15 minutes or so after the scan, the doctor comes in and pushed on my lower right abdomen and goes, "Does that hurt?" "Well, yeah, kind of, more than it did, but it's still not the worst," I told her. And basically, she kept pressing on my abdomen and making these faces like, "Wow, you really should be in more pain." And then she told me that I must have a really high pain tolerance because the CT scan had shown that not only did I have appendicitis, but perforated appendicitis. Basically, from what I understand, my appendix decided to just kind of explode inside my abdomen, which is not good. It's not good when parts of you decide to pop open and everything inside your body. It spreads infection everywhere. It's not good at all. So basically, there were two choices. Emergency surgery, which she said was usually done in the past anyway, but because of how bad the infection was, the surgery would be really dangerous and really extensive. Instead, she thought that the best course of action would be to try to clear up the infection before doing the operation. Given how young I was and how much little pain I was in, she thought it would be fine, for me to wait a little bit. So then I go on to spend the best part of the next week or more in the hospital getting antibiotics via IV, basically around the clock. I was hooked up to 2 different IVs. They were pumping me full of fluid. They were pumping me full of everything. It was not fun. And I was kind of lectured about my pain tolerance being so high that if I felt any pain at all around the appendix region, it's probably a sign of the infection coming back. Basically, I guess I just don't feel that much pain. I don't really know why. If I stub my toe, it hurts like hell, but for some reason, my appendix explodes and it doesn't really hurt that bad. After a couple days in the hospital, though, they decided the infection had cleared up enough that they could send me home with some antibiotics and schedule the surgery to have my appendix removed in a little over a month. So, I'd still be taking the antibiotics for a little while, but I got to go home, which was nice, because nobody wants to spend December, Christmas and everything in the hospital. So, luckily I was home for that. Obviously, this was a little bit weird and not really something that I'd ever heard of, because usually when you watch TV or you talk to anybody who's in the past has had appendicitis, they tell you that they just take out the appendix right away. So I was a little bit concerned about that, and so was everybody that I talked to, but I was at a pretty good hospital, so I went along with it. Whatever, I figured, what could go wrong? Well, those are some famous last words. As it turned out, waiting this extra amount of time was really not a good idea. I went in for the surgery in January. Just so you know, it's now July, and I'm only now beginning to actually feel somewhat better from what was to come. I didn't have any real pain or concerns in the time between the hospital stay and the surgery, but hey, remember how they told me that my pain tolerance was really high? Yeah, well, I'm guessing I probably should have been in a little bit of pain. You see, the surgery was supposed to be laparoscopic, meaning that they would put some little holes in my stomach and go in with these scopes and little tools on tubes to remove the appendix. You know, they told me I would be in there for an hour and a half at most. Well, spoiler alert, I did not wake up an hour and a half later. I did not wake up with some little incisions here and there. I woke up like 7 hours later with a massive incision going down my entire abdomen. The doctor tried to tell me what was wrong, but with all the pain meds they had put me on and the fact that the anesthesia hadn't worn off yet, I had absolutely no idea what she was saying. I honestly didn't find out what happened until hours later when I woke back up and I asked the nurse. Turns out that, yeah, the infection had come back and was really, really bad. They had to take out just a little bit more than just my appendix. I lost pieces of all sorts of stuff in my abdomen. Nothing like super critical to life. Nothing that I can't survive without. But, you know, there was an adjustment time where my body was not very happy with what they had removed. Luckily, I'm fine for that. I mean, they didn't take out my heart or anything, so I'm still alive. But man, it just was not a good experience. The next few days were spent slowly falling in and out of consciousness. Because of all the pain meds, the pain, the stress that my body had been under, I was barely awake for like an hour. I was really out of it pretty much all day for like the next couple days. You know, I couldn't even get out of bed. You know, I legitimately thought I was going to die at points. And I was pretty close to dying at points too. 0 out of 10, I would not recommend. I had all sorts of IVs. I had all these staples in my stomach. I couldn't get out of bed for at least 5 to 6 days. And when I did get out of bed, they thought I was dying even more because my heart rate was higher than most people's heart rate can sustain for a long period. We're talking over 170 beats per minute. So basically, my body was not doing so well. My heart could have, exploded because it was beating so fast. Could have just given out. I thought I was gonna die. The doctors were a little bit concerned I was gonna die. But in the end, I guess I didn't die. I was in that hospital for a week and a half. During all of that time, I couldn't eat or drink anything whatsoever. All of my nutrients, all my water, they were giving me through a tube in my arm. It sucked. By far though, the worst thing was this tube they shoved down my nose, right? It was an NG tube. If a doctor ever mentions an NG tube to you, just run. You're in for a bad time. It's basically this tube, they just shove it down your nose while you're awake, by the way, and it goes down your throat and into your stomach and constantly pumps it out for days at a time. You know, out of all the stuff they did to me, all the stuff that I legitimately could have died from, this was pretty much the worst. Not because it was dangerous. I'm pretty sure the NG tube is not dangerous at all. The real problem was it just sucked. Every second that you're awake, you can feel it in the back of your throat, you know? It was the worst thing that you ever feel because every breath you take, every time you swallow, you feel it there. It's not painful, but it's just like, does not feel good. Does not feel human. I mean, they had to do this because if anything had built up in my stomach, I would have thrown up in my sleep and died. So I'm glad that I didn't, but I would not recommend getting an NG tube if you can avoid it. However, it did save my life. So if you need one, go ahead and use it. It sucks. Every time you breathe in, you feel it. And I can still feel it. It's been months. I can still feel where it was in the back of my throat every time I talk. Could have been worse. I mean, it did make me want to cough a lot, which was not great. When you have a massive open incision on your stomach, coughing is not the easiest thing to do either. And neither was breathing or laughing. Pretty much anything. Any movement was quite painful at that point, And despite feeling that I was close to death and having multiple doctors tell me that I was lucky to be alive and that I was so lucky to be healthy and young, because otherwise, if I was older, I would have died. I did eventually get to go home. But for weeks afterwards, it was hard for me to sit up, walk. Basically, I couldn't move for like a while afterwards until the incision started to close itself up. But hey, that wasn't the end of it. No, I mean, as it turns out, I'd picked up a little thing called an antibiotic-resistant infection during my time at the hospital, which is exactly as good as it sounds. And just a little warning, the next section is going to be kind of gross with what I'm describing, so just be warned about that. Luckily, it wasn't resistant to some of the stronger antibiotics that they have and use in the United States, so they sent me home with some of that to try to clear it up. And try is the big word there. As it turned out, I ended up back in the emergency room once again in either March or April because I'd had an abscess. Not only that, but the abscess had decided to burst open on me while I was standing in my house, meaning that all sorts of abscess fluids went everywhere, and I had to wait and, drain it. Like, basically, it just all this fluid started coming out of it. It wasn't blood, so I wasn't, like, super concerned. Like, I was pretty concerned because when something bursts out of your chest like a chest burster, you tend to be a little bit concerned. But it wasn't that bad because it wasn't red, it wasn't blood, so I knew I wasn't dying. So I just kind of waited for it to stop, which is not great because luckily they sent me home with all sorts of gauze pads and stuff because of the incision that I had. So I had plenty of stuff to deal with it. It was just the grossest thing I've ever seen in my life. And it just so happened I was just standing there and phew, I was like, uh-oh, that's not good. Don't ever have that happen. It's not fun. You don't ever want to see that much stuff come out of a place it's not supposed to, especially when it's like on your stomach. It was concerning, but I knew I wasn't gonna die. I did debate on calling an ambulance to take me to the hospital, but since the stuff that came out wasn't blood, I was fairly sure I wasn't gonna die. I mean, I'm pretty good in emergency situations, so cleaned myself up, covered it up with some bandages, and got driven into the emergency room, where they basically ripped me back open, except this time, I wasn't actually knocked out for it, so I got to watch them rip me open with these scissors and these tweezers. They injected some kind of local anesthetic, and they just kind of went to town, opening it back up in the emergency room hallway, by the way, because I wasn't in an actual room. I was in like a hallway spot in the emergency room. They just decided to rip me open so that it would reheal and hopefully not get infected again. And being reopened is not great, you know, not the worst thing that could have happened. I didn't die again. It was a pretty big setback to my recovery. And at that point, the infection was really, really bad too, to the point where they considered keeping me again to do IV antibiotics. But in the end, they decided I would just have to take the antibiotic pills at home because they didn't want to keep me in the hospital anymore. I've been in the hospital for so long already. They kind of figured it should be fine. We'll send him home with these antibiotics and it should clear it. And well, that was fine and dandy, actually. I was fine for a little while, and it was about as fine as dandy as having yourself ripped open can be. I mean, I kind of lived in constant fear of accidentally disemboweling myself. Whether or not that's actually possible, I was still afraid of it. Eventually, though, things started getting back to normal, or so I thought. You see, a few weeks went by after it cleared up, right? I was all healed back up. The spot where they ripped me back open was healed again. And then I started to feel something in my side. A pain in my side, a familiar pain came back. Well, not good. The next day, I found myself with another fever. So, I decided to just go back into the emergency room. Turns out the infection was back and I was, well, septic, which is not ideal and can be pretty dangerous to you and is not great for life. But I also had another abscess on top of that. The abscess before hadn't healed right or whatever, and it re-abscessed. That infection grew when I became septic. And then I ended up in the emergency room, basically falling apart again. But I spent a few more days in the hospital because of that. You know, they gave me more IV antibiotics to deal with the infection. It was not great. They put a drain into the abscess so that it would heal correctly this time, which if you've ever had one of those, you'll know that it's not fun, but it's kind of pretty gross. Drains are not fun. They look awful. 0 out of 10 wouldn't recommend. Anyway, though, I did get out of the hospital again, you know, after a few days in there with the IV antibiotics, and you know, they took the drain out a couple days after that, and it's not the best, but I think that I'm finally starting to get back to normal for real this time, hopefully. Knock on wood. That was a couple of weeks ago that all that happened. So yeah, I think things are finally back on the upswing for me. I think I'm finally getting back to normal, but at this point, who knows? Something else could happen in a month. Honestly, though, I'm finally starting to feel good enough to make videos again, though, so hopefully we can get back to posting some stuff on some kind of regular basis. Hopefully, you know, a couple videos a week here and there. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. The TLDR, this whole video, is that appendicitis is really serious and can mess you up for months. So if you do develop pain in the lower right side of your abdomen, you should pretty much call the doctor as soon as you can, so you don't end up like me. Anyway, thank you so much for watching again. Remember to hit that like button. Remember to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and I'll be seeing you again soon. Have a good day. God bless.